Imagine if today was the day your idea changed someone's life. Imagine if you could help someone pay for college, help your community build a new playground, or help a child make it to that dream competition. With GoFundMe, it's all possible. GoFundMe is the world's #1 fundraising platform trusted by over 190 million people. Every week, ordinary people meet their goals and do extraordinary things. Your ideas matter. GoFundMe isn't just for emergencies. Want to raise money for your kid's soccer team or raise funds for a small business, a creative project, or event? GoFundMe helps you turn ideas into reality. And help adds up. Fundraisers you start for someone else raise up to 5 times more. So think right now, who could use your help? Change rarely comes from waiting. It comes from someone deciding, today I'll start. Don't wait for someone else to bring change. Today, start your fundraiser in just minutes at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com to start your fundraiser. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
How far are you willing to go to indulge in a habit you know potentially isn't that good for you? I'm talking about rolling your sleeves or pants up, enjoying the sounds of a buzzing electric nail file or the distant dialogue between two coworkers, and getting a fresh gel manicure or pedicure. Seems harmless, but the European Union is putting an end to that guilty pleasure, or at least trying to change it for the better. A recent study showed that a chemical found in gel nail polish, Trimethylbenzoyl Diphenylphosphine Oxide, also known as TPO, was found to be a reproductive toxicant when tested on animals. And with the EU's risk-based stance on product regulation, the sale and use of TPO is officially banned across all of its countries. And although Canada knows TPO's potential risks, it hasn't made the jump of banning it from showing up in your manis and petties. So what's the deal exactly? Are Canadians not worth the level of protection granted to Europeans? Or is the EU opening a protective umbrella so big that maybe isn't necessary to ensuring their country's safety? I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to Miriam Diamond, a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences and the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto, to break down the ban of TPO across the pond and how it could inspire similar impacts here in Canada. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for the invitation, Maria.
So it isn't necessarily the gel nail polish that's the cause of concern here, but rather a specific ingredient in its formula. Trimethylbenzoyl Diphenylphosphine Oxide, also known as TPO, is what the EU is taking concern with. Pushing the topics of manis and petties to the side for a second, what exactly is TPO and where is it traditionally found?
TPO is produced in relatively high production volumes. In this context, it's found in nail gels and hardening agents, but it's also used as an adhesive. It has many different uses in industrial applications.
So what we're talking about here is its use in gel nail polish. So the EU has banned the use and sale of TPO after studies revealed it could be a reproductive toxicant. How does the risk of TPO present itself in manicures and pedicures? Like, what's the chemical reaction that we're concerned about here?
The European Union has a different regulatory system than in Canada. The European Union banned TPO because, notably, one study found that TPO could cause malformations in the fetus of the of a mammal to which it was injected. So it's not the mom herself, but it could cause reproductive malformations in the fetus. Now, the dose was relatively high. According to European Union regulations, specifically the REACH regulation, a hazardous chemical should not be used. So a hazardous chemical here is defined as a carcinogen, a mutagen, or a reproductive toxicant. Hence, the European Union has moved to remove formulations in nail products that have TPO in them. Now, your question was, well, what's the risk? So risk is a combination of what you're exposed to and what the bad effect could be. So the bad effect we've just gone over, it's the reproductive toxicant. Now, in Canada, though, we consider exposure. Is the exposure going to be high enough to cause the likelihood of an effect on the fetus? And so far, Canada has determined that exposures are unlikely to be high enough to cause that adverse effect, that effect on the fetus. That's because there's likely limited exposure to TPO to the individual getting their nails done. Now, it's another thing to consider the nail salon workers, and we don't have studies showing either the likelihood or what those exposures are. So we don't know. We don't know what the exposures are to nail salon workers.
When it comes to the use of the TPO in the gel nail polish, is it simply when the paint is applied to a nail, or does it get like activated when it goes under the UV light, or is it simply just the painting of the nail polish?
So the formulation is that it's painted on the nails. It's activated when the chemical is under UV light, and hence putting one's fingers or I presume toes under a UV light. And then what the UV light does is to cause a chemical reaction that hardens the TPO, so that the application of the paint or the nail becomes very, very hard. So it's a very strong adhesive.
For those who've been getting gel manicures, including myself, should they be worried about any potential damage that might have been caused already?
I think the likelihood of an adverse effect to the person getting their nails done is very low. That's the exposure piece. But then let's look at the question more broadly. Should you be concerned? Well, yeah, I would be concerned because I'm concerned about the nail salon workers. I'm concerned about the people who actually make TPO. TPO comes from hazardous ingredients. So I'm worried about the people in the chemical manufacturing industry who are making them. In other words, it's not all about me. We live in a society where we should be taking care of one another. And taking care of one another means being mindful of the people who sit there for hours on end doing your nails. It means being mindful of the people that make the products that confer a sense of beauty or a sense of feeling good about yourself. Because it's not all about feeling good about myself. I feel good about myself when I help to protect other people.
As someone that's been getting her nails done forever, I go into the salon, I see the nail technician. They have their protective gear. They have their gloves. They have their mask on. Generally speaking, do you think nail technicians or nail salons could be doing more to protect themselves?
Well, the masks offer very minimal protection, if any. Really what they're doing is perhaps reducing the chance that the nail technician will get a cold or COVID. The masks do not prevent the nail technician from breathing in toxic chemicals. So the mask confers a little bit, but not a whole lot of protection. The gloves confer some protection, but then many nail salon technicians develop a dermatitis and you can't even wear the gloves. And the gloves are uncomfortable. So there is some protective, personal protective equipment worn by nail salon technicians, but it's unlikely to offer considerable protection.
In the study that was done, that we're basing our conversation off of, going back a little bit to the results of it being a reproductive toxicant, what exactly is that? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, it's a chemical that when mom is exposed, it causes problems in the fetus. So perhaps the most commonly understood reproductive toxicant is thalidomide. Thalidomide was prescribed by women for women in the 1950s and the 1960s to reduce nausea. It caused terrible birth defects in the fetus and in the newborns. Defects, of course, that persisted throughout the lifetime. For example, the loss of arms, the loss of legs. So terrible malformations. The malformation that was found in this case, in the case of TPO, was misaligned vertebrae. So the spine didn't develop properly.
I was curious to know if the EU has moved to ban it, why hasn't Canada made that same move? I mean, given that nail salons are basically in every plaza you see, they're so popular, and you know, I'm curious as to why Canada hasn't made that next step.
Well, that's a great question, Maria. And it's because we have different ways of regulating chemicals. In Europe, the way to regulate chemicals is with greater precaution. If some evidence shows that it's a hazardous chemical, a carcinogen, a mutagen, or a reproductive toxicant, then it's restricted from the market. In Europe, they don't wait to find out what the exposure scenarios are. Now, the criticism of that is that bans or restricts chemicals for which there could be very limited exposure. In other words, very limited risk. But Europe has decided to act on the side of precaution. In Canada, we take the approach that says, well, we're going to see if exposures are high enough. I think in cases that we know about, that approach is not sufficiently precautionary. We do know cases in which people have been exposed to chemicals that pose a hazard at current levels and that are causing a problem. And that's because we cannot measure everything everywhere. We can't figure out all the exposure scenarios. If it were up to me, I would take a more precautionary approach. I would not wait to find out if exposures are high enough to cause an adverse effect. Now, having said that, I also believe that we cannot know all the exposure scenarios that would lead to a person having a high enough exposure to cause an adverse effect.
What do you make of Canada's, I don't know if it's the correct term to maybe say that they're siding with the customers instead of protecting nail technicians and producers of TPO, but do you think that's irresponsible of them to be kind of looking out more for the consumers of TPO rather than those who work with it daily?
I don't believe that the policy, the regulation, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, sides with consumers. I don't believe that. Rather, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act talks about taking a precautionary approach. But in the case of restricting chemicals, in my opinion, does not take a sufficiently precautionary approach because we wait or want evidence that shows a high enough exposure when we know that it's not possible to do all those measurements or to think of all the exposure scenarios.
Do you think at any point Canada could kind of move to like a model of that of the EU?
I don't foresee Canada moving to a hazard-based approach, even though that's what I would advocate to be a safer approach. There is very strong lobbying on behalf of the chemical industry not to adopt a hazard-based approach. Very strong lobbying. My industry colleagues would say, why should we restrict a chemical if exposures are not sufficiently high to cause harm? And I would say, because we cannot collect enough data, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the imagination to understand all the exposure scenarios. That's why we need to be more precautionary.
So do you agree with what the EU is doing? Do you think that's the right move? Although there's a lot of maybe gaps in evidence there? Do you think it's the right thing to do, take a hazard-based approach?
Well, I agree in general with the hazard-based approach. I am not sure that the evidence was strong enough in the case of TPO.
I also assume, considering the formula for gel nail polish, it will now be banned. The main one of the main ingredients is now getting taken off the ingredient list. I'm assuming a new formula without TPO might drive up costs for salons and inevitably customers as well. What do you think of that?
Well, first, we just need to be clear that those formulations are being taken off the market in Europe, not in North America, not
Right.
in Canada. Okay. The second thing is, will it drive up cost? I have no idea. I would not assume so. I have no reason to assume that. It may change the function. It may be that the nails aren't. But I can't speculate. I really don't know what the replacement will be.
Okay. It's interesting to me because I would assume that, if an ingredient has been used this entire time and now, nail manufacturers or gel polish manufacturers have to find this new ingredient that doesn't have this potential a reproductive toxicant, they might have to, formulate a new formula, and that might cost more than the original gel nail polish. Because if gel nail polish, if a formula was found without reproductive toxicants, then I'm sure it would have been used already. And I'm sure there is somewhere, but I'm sure it's not being used as the standard because it perhaps is more expensive. It's not the cheaper option.
I would not go so far as to say it's going to drive up costs because I don't know. Let's not assume that if something is removed because it's hazardous, it's just going to cost the consumer more. I think that is, I think that's self-defeating. And I also think if there is the potential for reproductive toxicity, that's an enormous cost. That is an incredible cost. It's a cost to the mother, it's a cost to the family, it's a cost to that individual. So let's think of costs more broadly. It's also it could be a terrible cost to the nail salon workers. So again, let's think of costs really broadly, not just of what's affecting the cost of my nail polish.
If you were advising Canada to make a decision on TPO, what would you be telling them?
Well, I think the first thing I would hope is that we take a more hazard-based approach. But I've said that for many years. Perhaps with this podcast, we'll be able to influence those of us who are interested in this and can influence policy. Because policy does respond to people's views. So I'd love for the listeners of this podcast to go, you know what? Canada isn't doing a good enough job. I think we need a hazard-based approach when we restrict chemicals because we need to be more precautionary.
I like your
That's
view.
my hope.
I like your approach on it's more comprehensive. It's more overall. It's not about just us, the consumer. It's not about us, the individual. It's really about our neighbors. And we can stop doing something, but because it affects us, but that doesn't mean it's going to stop for everyone that it affects. So that's a big part of the puzzle.
Exactly. We need to look after one another. And our neighbors include the nail technicians, and the neighbors include those people making these hazardous chemicals.
Miriam Diamond, thank you so much for a very interesting chat today. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Maria. I appreciated your questions, your interest, and the opportunity to talk about this.
And that was The Big Story. If you like this conversation, be sure to send us your thoughts on it, leave a comment, or reach us on X at The Big Story FPN. The Big Story releases new episodes every morning on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Maria Kestane. Thanks for listening.